Welcome to Remarkable WAM.
Andy and I, we just kick off with a few bits and pieces, and we'll have probably a half-hour discussion. And I do honestly have a quiz.
Okay, cool. I'll do my best.
Where Andy is it'll be a running series for Andy to see if he can beat the resident guest.
Okay, come on then. Let's go for it. Let's do it.
All right. So here we go. Hello, my name's Chris Mills. Together with my friend Andy Reid, we are your hosts in this ongoing podcast or vlog. Depends how it goes. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. This is Remarkable WAM, and that's Remarkable Wealth and Asset Management. Thankfully, nothing at all to do with a rather successful 80s band. Today, we'll be hearing some more remarkable stories, activities, and initiatives from remarkable people working in WAM. So, Andy, how are you today? Looking forward to this?
I'm very well, thank you, Chris. Yes, I'm looking forward to it with our first guest proper, who is also called Chris.
Exactly, so. Proper is the word. So, and what are we? How are we going to be tackling this today? Do you think? What are you most looking forward to?
I'm looking forward to, firstly, how will our guests get on with our podcast format?
Yes.
I'm looking forward to the quiz. I'm looking forward to slowly filling my knowledge bank up with different parts of the wealth and asset management landscape. Because as I said in the pilot, I wanted to learn. So here I am learning. And then if I may, guest Chris, I'll have questions for you. Because I'm keen to find out how many steps you are away from the man on the street. So I'm always going to be taking that outside in points of view. So I'm good to go.
Well, let me introduce him, because we're joined by Dr Chris Sier, who was a policeman for 6 years, moved into financial services consulting, 7 years, moved into financial services consulting, chaired the FCA Institutional Disclosure Working Group, is a senior fintech envoy for the Northern Powerhouse, and also visiting / honorary professor at Leeds and Durham, respectively. But however, I believe that his day job, after all that, is as the executive chairman of Clearglass and I quote, helping asset owners see all of their investment costs in one place, end quote. He's a force of nature. I'll try my hardest to focus our attentions. And welcome to Remarkable WAM, Chris. How are you today?
I'm great. So if I'm guest Chris, what does that call you? I can think of a range of things to call you Chris, but if I just call you WAM Chris, can I call you WAM Chris?
Yes, and I think that's I'm appreciative of that. You could have called me far worse.
I have called you far worse.
Excellent. So look, the format of today, I have a series of questions, and I know that you are very good at talking about the stuff that you do. I've got some around your history, how you got to where you are today. I've got a topic here around personal questions. I don't quite know how personal they are, but we'll see. And then your current career and where we go next. There is a quiz, as Andy alluded to. So yes, exactly. Watch out. So look, I'm going to start earlier in your career. So you received your doctorate in marine ecology.
Yes, marine and environmental ecology. I'm sorry, my kitten has just joined me. Thank you.
Well, talking about ecology and
I did warn you it would happen.
It doesn't make for good radio, but that looks amazing. As it walked across you.
Yeah, she normally just turns her back to the camera,
like a Philip Pullman character. That was your partner demon. That was lovely.
Yeah, there you go. Indeed, yeah. So you said a marine and environmental biology. Yeah?
Yes.
So I did my my PhD working with the United Nations, studying in the Bay of Bengal, actually in the Indian Ocean. So at the time they had these things called CASE awards, cooperative awards in the sciences and education.
Engineering. No, it's engineering.
Engineering, environment, B for something. It was a long time ago. But the point was I was basically working for the United Nations as what I might describe as a climate change scientist. So I was there to look at reef ecology in the Bay of Bengal and Indian Ocean, to look at the impact of extreme environmental events, ostensibly caused by climate change and global warming.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I mean, I spent, crikey, 3-4 years doing it. Spent a lot of time living in the Maldives, diving in the Maldives. Great. So I really learned a lot about the Indian Ocean. And yeah, finished the PhD. It was an interesting time in my life, and decided to move on to other things when I was done. But if you ask me, global warming, climate change, is it real? Absolutely. I've seen the evidence and part of the group of scientists that proved it. So why wouldn't I?
So topic, and how, I mean, Andy, we were talking about this before, and your question was, so how do you go from doctorate in that, including the police, and then into financial services? How does this journey wend its merry way?
Yeah. So you're asking me? You're asking me? Yes.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
fine.
no,
Yeah. So I thought it was a kind of rhetorical question because you were going to answer it because you're going to theorize my journey. You know, off to the moon. Once I was there, I decided to move to something completely different. No, it's interesting. So the one thing I learned a lot about in the Maldives is that things aren't that interesting, but people are.
Right.
And you know, as a public schoolboy whose father was a fund manager, I'd never really experienced the gritty realities of life. And going out and living in a developing country taught me a lot about the gritty realities of life, and traveling around the Indian subcontinent and around the Indian Ocean. You know, you got to realize that people have very, very different lives, and I found them very interesting. I found that whole thing very interesting. So I wanted to learn more about how people lived other than what I'd experienced in my rather rarefied existence. And one of the things I'd learned, because I'd been punched in the nose way too many times as a student, is that there's a way to talk to people and there's a way to deal with people, and it's not the sort of, you know, being aloof. You've got to get in about them, and I didn't feel I was very good at it. So I had a brief moment, probably a drunken moment, where I asked myself, where am I going to learn about how to deal with people? And I decided the police was a very good place to learn. So when I finished my PhD, I got recruited into the police and ended up in Edinburgh, in the Lothian Borders Police, with a degree and a PhD, and spent 7 years there. And one of the nicest things, and it's something I learned very quickly, is that the police, you do a different job every day. There's no 2 days the same. And I got to say, that's, if I could define any job as being what I'd like to do, I don't care what it is, as long as every day is different. I don't ever want to do the same thing twice. I want to be at the steepest part of the learning curve all the time, because that sense of frisson, fun and danger and excitement that you get from really not knowing much about what you're doing, but having to work your own way through it, is really exciting for me. So living in that environment of constant change, constant, sometimes confrontation, was really good.
Do you still get the sense of a different day every day now?
I try to, yeah. So I really, for me, you know, being an entrepreneur now, amongst other things, and doing all them, you've talked about the portfolio career I've got. I mean, I'll take on anything, right? Because I want to try it. So, and I'll try and juggle my time, and sometimes I have to drop things and rationalize them. But as long as I'm keeping all the balls in the air, everything's okay. But for me, it's really important because I learn so much and transfer that learning from one place to the other all the time. There's, you know, one of my golden rules is actually a sort of a Silicon Valley rule, which is something that you hear that people like Larry Page in Silicon Valley do, which is you always get a meeting with him if you ask, because he wants to hear the pitch. But you don't get a second meeting unless you're any good.
Yeah.
So he'll give you 10 minutes in the coffee shop. He'll give you the elevated pitch. He'll always listen, because, you know, you never know what you're going to learn. And so I'd always say yes to meetings, And if it's not working out, I'll say thank you, and I won't speak to the person again, probably or possibly. But always say yes, because you can't go into the meeting with a preconception about what you're going to find out. You always find out things that you didn't expect. And sometimes they are not the things that you thought you would find out, even though not accepting the fact that you weren't expecting to find anything out at all. You learn about people, you learn about subjects, you learn about business, you learn about everything. So keep an open mind. And anything that allows me to keep an open mind is a good thing. Anything that closes me down, I will fight vigorously to avoid.
Because I mean, one of my next questions, I'm talking about, you know, you've worked for consultants and academics and regulatory bodies, and you're running a fintech. You know, you're joining the dots between all of those things of how what have you learned from those different cohorts? You know, in getting stuff done. Are you a collaboration connoisseur?
For someone who's very opinionated and generally thinks that he's right all the time, yes, collaboration is important. One of the things I've learned, one of the things I've learned, which sucks, is that governance is really, 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 really important.
Right.
Which sucks because putting governance in place immediately pins you down to a set of rules. But actually, the trick is using those rules to your advantage. Yes. So it's a bit like in the police, that the easiest way to get disciplined was if you screwed up on not punching someone in the face, no problem, right? You know, forgetting your paperwork, oh my God, they'd have you. Because it's their way of managing the governance of it. Civil service organizations, they're all about the paperwork and the governance. And governance is important because it gives you a framework on which to continue every other discussion. I mean, this isn't, please don't make this a conversation about governance and don't let me go down this wormhole. But it's really, really important. And, you know, be the one that takes the minutes. It's a shitty job, but you're in control if you take the minutes. Little things like this, you know, unexpected things. When you're allocated the job to take minutes, you think, oh, fucking grumble, 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 and then you write the minutes and you realize you can say what the hell you like because 90% of people don't read them.
That's entirely true. I mean, you and I have had this conversation, you know, around standards. It's exactly the same, isn't it? It's that I don't think either of us would love to be, you know, in a straitjacket and you know, where's your small box? You've just talked about how you don't want that, and yet quite often the way to get stuff done is to find the stuff in the box.
Okay, so
move on to a different box.
Here's the rule, right? In the police, you look in the shadows. You look for the things that people don't say as much as what they do say. You look for their gestures, the way they look, their eyes, in any kind of interview, watching these signals. If you put a standard in place, it's not what the people who adhere to the standard, who do it right, are not interesting. The ones who don't, and the way in which they avoid it, now they are materially interesting. So the way in which I rationalize getting involved with standards is, let's throw this into the marketplace. Let's chuck the stone in the water and see where the alligators are, shall we? Because they'll show themselves every single time. And what's interesting is, you know, you'd think that people would be brighter than that. Really, really clever people, really, really clever people work in asset management, but collectively they're morons. I mean, you put them together in a room and the collective intelligence falls to zero because it drops because they're so big, they don't coordinate. And it's a classic issue for the industry that it doesn't coordinate. And so when you do something like this, the intelligent ones, or the ones that are process driven, will answer the requests, will adhere to the standard, won't create a fuss. But the ones that you really want to know are the ones that aren't going to adhere to it. So a standard is useful to generate the information about where you need to look.
So you...
sorry, Chris, with your, you're not backwards in coming forward, which is refreshing and marches things on. Looking back on your career then, when people have come up against your point of view, what do you think that they battle with? Is it the quality of the idea, the nature of its difference, the kind of...
It's the delivery.
Or is it the delivery?
It's the
How
delivery.
have you managed to temper? How have you managed to temper? So you no longer get punched in the face, but you sort of get...
I get a psychological punch in the face every time from someone.
How
It's
have you
okay.
managed to navigate that then? Sort of tempering
I heal easily and don't take offense, right? So to me, it's all part of a game, right? You shake the tree, you see what falls out, but you got to shake the tree. Sometimes the branches get broken. I mean, where am I going with this metaphor? I've got no idea. But the point is that the delivery style is blunt, almost deliberately so. So I'm perfectly capable of being reasonable. I'm perfectly capable of being measured. And the most measured time of my life was when I was working with the FCA. And they made me measured by the extent of their professionalism and the respect I had for them. So that respect made me want to play their game rather than me playing mine. But actually, there's a time and a place for all of these things. Part of my problem is I really enjoy the role of being a tree shaker so much. I can get carried away, and there's no doubt about it. I mean, I'm blunt to the point of being offensive.
Creating a ruckus, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean,
the pigeon on the statue.
Let me give you an example. And okay, this is an old police thing, right? There's no when I was in the police, there was no procedure around how to deal with domestic disputes.
Mm.
There was a statistic which says that 9 out of 10 serious injuries or murders, call it what you will, are committed by someone you know. And in a domestic violence situation, it's almost always the man that commits it to the woman, on the woman. And if you're called to a domestic dispute, you have to be even-handed, don't you? Right? You have to be, because you don't have any evidence. You've maybe got some. No, not true at all. I had one rule: get the man out of the flat. He's drunk. He's angry with his wife or his partner because he believes that she's the one that's called the police, even though it's the neighbor. So you get the man out of the flat. And sometimes she doesn't want you to get him out of the flat because, for whatever misguided reason, she's totally dependent on him. And there is this point where you want to arrest him, you want to sort him out, but she's saying he didn't do anything. It wasn't him. I love him. I love him. You've got to sort it out because you're going to come back to a murder the next day. What do? You start a fight, because then you can arrest him for police assault. And the next day, you're the one with 5 stitches over your eye and the broken nose, but you can feel good about yourself because she's alive. So sometimes you have to start the fight.
That's a story.
You have to start the fight, because if you don't start the fight, you don't get to sort the problem out. You don't get to prick the boil. You have to prick the boil. And I'm too fond of that, and it's dangerous. I'm too fond of that now. It's a model that I've adopted. It's been successful, and now I have to find some other way of doing it. The very fact that I'm talking in this way in the conversation means that I'm not ready to give up that modus operandi.
Oh, no, that's good. And then linking it back to the sort of the mission of our podcast, Chris, host Chris. What did we got? WAM Chris.
WAM Chris, yeah.
Sounds like a frisbee. WAM Chris, the 2000. The fight that I think you want to cause is to shake up the wealth and asset management space, and you want to commit some fine. I'm trying going along with the
let's be honest here, right?
Yeah,
you've got a massive industry here in the UK. It's £7 trillion managed by asset managers, and it's an industry that managing it that has a 50% profit margin. Now those are two numbers, give or take a trillion or 5 percentage points, that have been proposed by the FCA in their asset management market study. This is an industry that makes an inordinate amount of money from other people's money. And every percentage point that they make as a profit is money that's taken out of consumers' pockets, because that 7 trillion is funded by only one group of people, and that's the consumer. Now, if the consumer is aggrieved about not having the performance it wants, if it's aggrieved because the money and savings it has are not performing, well, there's lots of ways that they can get the money back and recoup and make the industry improve. But one of them is to reduce the cost base of the industry, because you reduce the cost base of the industry and it goes on the bottom line as a performance. It's pretty simple. It's a T account. What isn't a cost is a performance. What is a performance gain is a cost reduction. It's exactly the same thing. And so we need to start a conversation around the cost base of the industry. Now, the fact that I've framed it about the profit margin of the asset managers is somewhat unfair. It is a very emotive point, and if the consumer ever realised that asset managers, when most other industries are no more than 20 to 30% net profit margin, and asset managers are at 50%, and that's after paying out a mean salary of over £250,000 per employee. Once you get past that, what you realise is that asset management is a very complex supply chain, and everything you see in the City of London, in places like Edinburgh, all of that infrastructure, all of those buildings, all of those people buying lunches at Pret and going into Tiffany's and the Royal Exchange, those are all people, and they're not all asset managers. Some are brokers, some are custodians, some are data providers. They're all funded by this same £7 trillion pot of money. The question we have to ask ourselves is one of fairness. Why is there such a high concentration of wealth being derived from other people's money going to such a few people at the expense of a very, very almost malaise that's affecting the entire savings industry in the UK? Everything you hear is about underperformance. Now we've got a whole conversation about, actually, we own some stuff. Maybe we can influence the agenda of climate change because we own stuff. We've always owned stuff. Why is it only now that we're realizing we have power? Why is it only now that, because no one's raised the conversation before, no one's rocked the boat?
So I'm going to park the ESG for a moment, because I'll come back to your point about standards and the fight. So I think that where you are now at Clearglass started, or one of the areas that it materially started was when you were chairing the Institutional Disclosure Working Group and you were developing the standards. So the way you started the fight to fix the fairness problem was trying to establish standards around cost. Is that right?
It is. But there's an important thing about standards, is that sometimes it's advantageous to the industry that's having the standard imposed on them.
Right.
So the way in which I'm winning at the moment is by not just attacking an industry that generically may or may not be doing a good job, but costs a lot of money for whatever it does. Actually, there are managers in there who have always felt that there are bad actors in their industry that need to be dealt with. And they've never done it before. And I think it's because, there's a comfort in not rocking the boat. So to give you the classic expression I heard from dozens of asset managers, we like to be a close second. We're never a first mover. How the hell does that work? Somebody has to be a first mover for there to be a close second. If you're all close seconds, where's the first mover?
Well,
so if everybody
following the one in front, aren't they?
Yeah, well, that's right. It's big. So the issue you have with those, you have to get them to the point where they have something they can latch onto as a pseudo first mover or a close second.
Yes.
And putting a standard out there means it absolves them from being a first mover, because actually, no, it's a requirement. We're not first movers and doing it occasionally. We're doing it because we have to. So the big trick with setting that standard for me and realizing it, because I set a standard before that was the one for the LGPS like 3 years before, was that as soon as you give something that people can get their teeth into, this is a standard, right? Is it open source? Yeah, absolutely. So we can use this to get our asset managers to give us data. Yes, of course you can. Do you mind if we do? No, absolutely not. Go for it. As soon as you give someone something concrete and they get the opportunity to see everything the same way in the same place in a way that no one's defined it before, they will jump on it. The FCA was the second iteration of that standard. So the FCA was me stepping up the game from creating the LGPS standard, the local government pension scheme standard, to setting the one, actually this time with the blessing of the FCA. Previously, I had a big industry, as in asset owner lobby, the LGPS at my back. But now I had the FCA at my back. And as soon as I wrote that standard, as soon as I put that to market, it became an unstoppable force. So all of those managers that wanted to be a close second, didn't matter if they were first, not because they were doing something particularly disruptive to the industry, but because they had to, because it was a required standard.
So can you join the dots for me between the standard that you're producing around, let's say, reporting on costs and charges? How does that join all the way back to your point at the beginning, which was end consumers? How do you make that journey?
So the 7 trillion, if you divvy up the 7 trillion pounds in the UK that's managed by asset managers, 3 trillion of it is in long-term savings, which are pension funds. Right. So there's about 1.5 trillion of DB funds, maybe about 1.6, and then approaching 2 or even 1.5 to 2, I'd call it, in DC funds. The point is, those funds are administered not by the consumer, they're administered for the consumer by professional organizations called institutional investors.
Yes.
And they're the ones who make decisions about what to buy, what not to buy, what to sell, what to not to have in the pension fund, to generate the objectives for the consumer, which are a pension fund, right? So a DB pension fund, you're trying to give people the certain outcome when they retire. In a DC pension fund, you're trying to give them a pot of money that can be turned into potentially an annuity or whatever you want to do, which gives you an income when you retire. Either way, there are third parties making decisions for the consumer. And what I do is the standard is addressed at those organizations, because 3 trillion is the largest part of that marketplace, the largest single part of that marketplace. And it's relatively concentrated. So in the UK, there are 67, 70 million people. There are 30 million, 40 million, 50 million pensioners, but there are 5,500 defined benefit schemes and 34,000 DC schemes. So you've taken tens of millions of people, which you would otherwise have to address individually, and you've concatenated them into a hierarchy of just 34,000 DC funds and 5,500 DB funds. Now it gets better than that, because on the DB side, there are a number of consolidators coming in. So there's some of the super funds that are coming in, but there are fiduciary managers that take that 5,500 further down. But actually, there are only about 11 consultants that advise 80% of that market. So you've taken tens of millions of people and you've taken them down to just 11 organizations you need to talk to. And 34,000 DC funds tend to go through platforms. And in that workplace pension fund space, there are, some 20 IGCs, which are not workplace pensions, but you've got some 20 GAAs, a number of other consolidators. So actually what you've done is the reason why the standard is aiming at that level is because if you can improve the decision making of that relatively small concentrated group of people who are in charge of those, then you impact the output to the consumer.
Right.
And you do it by not having to dress the consumer properly, which requires all kinds of regulations and so on, but also the massive task of communicating directly with tens of millions of people, which is impossible in almost every single way, because most won't listen to you. And you've got the attention of the people that actually are making decisions on their behalf.
So you're choosing, or you're exerting your influence where you think it will make most difference.
Correct. And so if you ask me why I left the police, there are a couple of reasons why, because this kind of plays into this. The first reason was I was getting married, or I was getting married. Wasn't thinking of getting married at that time, but I was with someone, my wife, who basically said, "You're in Scotland, I'm in London. I've got a big job. I work for McKinsey. You work in the police. If you want to have a family, it's going to be me that has to pay for it. So you got to come here." Fine. Secondly, it's a dangerous job. You've been stabbed. You've been shot at. There's a whole host of stories I could tell you about stuff that happened to me in the police, pelvis fractured, bones broken, all that stuff. It happens, right? You're going to get knocked over.
That was just the other guy.
That was just the other guy, right? So it's
the
dangerous.
induction day. I mean,
But actually, following on from my theme of wanting to do something valuable, and I do want to do something valuable with my life. I want to feel like I've made a difference. You can make a difference one person at a time in the police, maybe one city at a time if you're the chief constable, or division at a time if you're a superintendent. But to make a macro difference on people's welfare, you've got to work in one of two careers. You either work as a politician or you work in finance. Finance controls all of the conversations. So to me, being a politician, can you see me being a politician? I could never see myself being a politician. That meant I had to find a home in finance. So I came to finance. That's how I got here, because I wanted to make a difference. And if one follows that through, if I wanted to ever do anything that ever had the largest impact, it would be to do something that significantly improved the welfare of people in the largest of their saving vehicles, which is the pension fund, by far and away.
Is there a parallel, Chris? When you were talking there, you're talking about a very small percentage of people that are a very small number of people that advise a small percentage of people about the wants and needs of maybe 30 million pensions. And I was thinking, who else or where else do we see a parallel? And I thought actually the world of medicine. So you will have a very small number of very learned advisors, probably speaking to policymakers and standards of medical sign-off.
Sage, right?
Yeah. Who then instruct the delivery systems of medicine advice and therapeutic care to everyone. Okay. But that sage is that the input is the efficacy of medicine and the feedback from doctors and nurse and patient interactions. All of that insight feeds in to the system accordingly. I believe, I hope, with other members of my family working for the NHS, that there's actually an iterative feedback loop. When you were talking earlier, I didn't see or hear that loop. It seemed to me that there's a very small number of people who make decisions about what's best for everybody when it comes to financial instruments. Is that true? And if so, do you think there's an opportunity to get better feedback?
It depends. It depends. So that they make their decisions based upon information and data. If they don't have the information and data, or to take it even further, if they're not even aware of the need for that information and data, then they can't make those decisions. And the purpose of the standard and the purpose of what I do is to give them the information they need to make better decisions. I'm not a consultant, so what I'm not going to do is to say, this is the decision you need to make. I'm going to say, these are the tools that you need to make a better decision. So all of the data that I have goes into producing reports that are often quite eye-watering and eye-opening for some of these organizations or individuals who are in charge of lots of money, because I routinely tell them that what they were expecting as a cost X is actually 2X. And what it means from their point of view, rather not sadly, but rather worryingly, is that they have been unaware of at least 50% of their costs for time immemorial. And what I've done is I've uncovered it. It's always been there. It just wasn't above the line. It was below the line. But the best part about it is, and this is the message I give them is, so first of all, I'm going to tell you something, you might not like it. But given the current environment, you have to do it, right? Secondly, you have a moral obligation because you have a fiduciary responsibility. But thirdly, do you want to be a hero? What do you mean by that? Well, you can't manage what you don't measure. And if you ever thought of negotiating with your managers or your suppliers a 10% cost reduction to the size of on your cost base, if you think that cost base is £1 million, the amount of money you're going to negotiate down is £100,000. But if I tell you it's not 1 million, it's 2 million, and you negotiate a 10% discount, it's actually £200,000 you're going to be saving your customers. So what would you prefer? Would you prefer to be a guy that doesn't uncover £2 million of cost, but doesn't make £200,000 of savings? Or do you want to be the guy that only recognizes £1 million of cost, but saves his customers £100,000? I can tell you the latter case, or the former case, where you admit that the costs are higher, but do something about it, that's when you're a hero. Because those savings multiply up each year, every year, for the whole duration of your investment.
You started awards, haven't you? With you talk about your exceptional transparency. Are those the managers you're talking about?
Yeah, no. So I'm talking there about asset owners, right? I'm talking there about the pension funds. They find that out. But to find that out, the data must have been given by asset managers. Now, it's not like asset managers didn't know this stuff was there, but they never felt obligated to give it because it was complex. It hadn't been defined. So to give you my, if you like, my kind of blasé way of describing the problem set is you've got a £7 trillion industry that does not know how to talk to itself. On one side, you've got a bunch of people with all the money who are giving it to a bunch of people on the other side to look after, to grow, and to manage, right? Two sides, and they don't have a common lexicon to describe how they should interact. They don't have that dictionary. And what I've done is I've provided them with one line of communication, right? So what I've basically done is I've created the single coherent language that allows them to communicate. Now, that's an exaggeration because there were always means of communicating, but every single constituent on one side would send whatever data they wanted in whatever format they wanted to the other, so there was no comparability. The other side would get all of this data and not know what to do with it because they couldn't consolidate it, and then would have additional requirements because some people are quite smart and they want more information, and they go back to the managers who then had to give more data. And you had this kind of washing backwards and forwards of information that was totally incoherent. And now we've got a single line of communication. Now you add on to that the other levers, right? What else? You ask yourself the generic question. I've got a marketplace now, which is 400 or 500 pension funds large. So I've got all the largest ones. I've got 65% of pension funds in the UK who are $1 billion in size because they all want to have this stuff. I've got all of the consultants in varying degrees and with varying intensities. And I've got 450, 60 asset managers I've taken data from. And I've got this marketplace. And all I say to myself is, what else do you want to know about each other? Because I've created a common theme. I've got credibility to take cost data and parse it across that vertical. So what else do you want to know? What else is bothering you? And it becomes pretty obvious what that is. And it's all grounded on one fact that when it all comes down to it, the denominator for communicating between a buyer and a seller is price. So one of the things that bothers me immensely right now is when people talk about ESG and they say they even say you can buy ESG and it won't impact the performance. In fact, you might get a performance uplift. And I think, what kind of mixed up, twisted language is that? Why are you comparing two variables and not getting the denominator? The question you should be asking is very simple. If I pay more for something, how much of that something will I get for paying that much more?
Yes.
So all I want to compare, first of all, is the cost for the fund. And then I want to measure the thing that I'm buying it for, which is I'm buying it for ESG. Because right now, you can't answer the question when you look at two asset managers, you can't answer the question, which one gives me more ESG, to paraphrase. You can't. I can tell you what the costs are, though. I can also tell you that comparing ESG funds to non-ESG active funds, let's say, the first thing you do is double the price. But there is no indication, no provable indication, that what you're getting is twice as much ESG as a standard fund, because no one has described the communication mechanism for ESG. So it all comes back down to, people often say, why are you so obsessed with the cost? For God's sakes, you won't stop. And I'll say, because when you're thinking about value, everybody starts with the word value and then almost whispers the next part, which is for money.
Yes.
And they don't say it out loud. Say it. Be bold, say it. It's value for money. And the value component will change, because some people will say the thing I'll pay more for is performance. So the value number for me is performance. I will pay more for performance. You've got to have payment there. You've got to have the money part. Some people say, okay, I'm happy to pay more for more ESG. Great. So you've still got to manage the money. The money is always the baseline by which you compare everything else. So the reason I'm obsessed with the money is because it's the fundamental communication between client and supplier. And then you add on the value components above that. So when I say I want to figure out more of these channels of communication, well, I've got one. I've got the most important one. I've got the basic one. It's how much it costs. Because once you've got that baseline, you can start adding on the other parts. What's the value component? Performance. I've got that. What's the value component? Well, manager behavior. I collect that. So I've got 3. What's the next one? ESG. Well, no one's got that yet, but I'd love to be involved. What's the next one? Voting. Well, the PLSA has described a voting standard, but it doesn't apply for pooled funds, so we're not quite there yet. All right, what's the next one? Service. Well, there are people who've tried service, but it has never quite worked out. It still has to have the cost, because the service is not relevant unless you know how much you're paying for it. So you can start adding up these things, and what you end up with is a proper description of the relationship between the seller and the buyer. And that's where I'm going. That's where I want to be. I want to be able to inform clients better about what they're getting for the money they're paying. Because above all else, they're supposed to be fiduciary responsible for the assets and for the money they're taking from their clients.
And I mean that was fantastic, Chris, because that, the concept of value for money, and Andy and I have talked a lot about what does wealth mean to people, but value for money is a descriptor that anybody understands.
Yeah,
or most people understand. And you can have, the money bit is objective, that doesn't change, and the value bit is subjective upon the buyer, isn't it? Is what do I value?
Absolutely.
And that's as you're right, you want different lenses for different perspectives or value.
So let me give you the cynicism and irony about this. And cynicism of the industry and the irony about it is that managers will say, well, we should be rewarded because we're the ones, if we're giving people good value, who cares how much we get paid? They've always said it's net performance that matters. Net performance that matters. And we've derived a good return. Fine. In that case, why do you feel awkward sitting in a local government office dressed in an Armani suit? Because you do, don't you? I'm sitting here in front of a bunch of private equity managers, and you're sitting on sitting at Formica tables on plastic chairs, and you realise you've completely misjudged the dress code, because you pitched up in Armani with a gold and diamond necktie, because hey, you may have delivered value, but in relative terms, you still feel pretty awkward about how much you're paid right now, don't you? So there's a fairness question we have to address, as well as that relative value. Another example, well-known asset manager, it always delivers good performance to its clients, and you'd think, well, okay, we're asset managers, we do something really high value, and we're just taking a proportion of how much because we're heavily incentivized by performance fees. We should feel happy about being paid 2, 3, 10 million pounds a year. In that case, why did the managing director insist that nobody come to work in a sports car and everybody had to drive in family cars? Why? Because the car park where the managers were parking their cars was visible from the client meeting rooms. So you can't tell me, asset managers, that you don't know there's a problem. You can't. You know viscerally there's a problem. You know that it's an awfully awkward conversation to be sitting in somebody who's managing the pension funds of, let's face it, relatively poor people in an Armani suit driving an Aston Martin.
Well, these examples that, and I'm sitting behind, because there's humour in theatre behind them, but you're not being glib. You're saying that there's a physical relationship with people's perception of value when it turns up on different sides of the fence. Mm-hmm. For most of the time, and which is odd, because for most of the time the monies that these people are charged with aren't seen by the consumer. I don't get to see physically my pot, and I'm entrusting it to you, Mr. Armani, 20, 30 or 40 years, and then I get it at the end. So there's this sort of wealth can disappear for the consumer.
The contract breaks when you don't get what you expect, right? So DB pension funds were well known for having a contract that was unbreakable. And it's not surprising that all of the unions and USS and all of the, like the University Superannuation Scheme, university lecturers are saying, don't change the rules now. We were promised a definitive outcome. But then you realize, and they're going to go on strike and do all these kind of things. And you hear this all of the time, but actually you figure out what these people earn when they retire. You know, the average USS person probably has a pension that's going to give them £25,000, £30,000 a year. The average LGPS pension is, I think it's like something ridiculous, like £7,000.
Yeah.
And they're not gold-plated. Only the top civil servants get the gold-plated massive payoffs. The point being that you still get a guaranteed outcome, don't you? So it's not like your pension and my pension and probably your pension, Andy, where you've got some kind of DC workplace or personal in pension where the value, you're directly going to be linked to the performance of the fund. And the contract is broken all the time because you find out that your investment manager or your pension fund is invested in all the wrong stuff and 20% of the value has been wiped up overnight.
Yeah.
In DB fund world, everybody was protected until British Home Stores collapsed, until Tata Steel collapsed. And the contract between the employer and the underlying pension fund was broken until Robert Maxwell raided the pension pot. And that was when it was overfunded. Now the equivalent to raiding the pension funds is not putting in enough contributions to make sure that you are upholding what is the contract that you have with the employees to give them enough money, right? To make sure that the thing you promised them, which was what is it going to be? A commutation of 12.5% of your pension fund, valued at an annuity rate to give you a cash lump sum that was tax free, and 50% of your last salary averaged over your salary averaged over the last 3 years. And you realise that all of that is going to go because there isn't enough money in the pot, because assets haven't performed and contributions haven't been high enough. And you've got to ask yourself, where's the problem? Well, I think actually assets not performing because money is being drained away from cost is a very, very serious issue. But what is an equally serious issue is that the employer not properly looking at the valuation of the pension fund and writing in a contingency that says, actually, I have an obligation to my employees. If I go bust, they may not have enough money in the pension fund to be able to pay the obligations we wrote for them. And that's exactly what's happening. It's why Philip Green is being asked to put in 300 million and his wife has offered 30. I'm getting the numbers right, but that's kind of where we are, right? Mm-hmm. The people who work for British Home Stores or for Topshop, Arcadia, their whole lives, who've been contributing to a defined benefit pension fund, now realize they're going to have to take a pretty big haircut to go into the pension protection fund. And the contract that they had in their mind of stability is broken. And trust is gone, and you know the whole market is shivering at the impact of the peculiarities in the market at the moment, the variability in the equity markets, all of that stuff that we've had for the past 12 years since the financial crisis, ups and downs and highs and lows and volatility. It's had a massive impact on the way people who otherwise thought they were safe have had to realize that in fact they're not.
So are you confident that the work you're doing with Clearglass, and I know I'm conscious we're only talking about the UK, And I think
No, we're not, because I work in Europe and I work in South Africa as well, and Botswana now as well.
right.
So
the
this
situation is very similar.
Yeah, places where people are, where institutional investors are realizing they don't have the information they need to make proper decisions, right? Am I confident there's going to be an impact? Well, yes, of course. So to give you an example, we obviously get involved in discussions now where managers are being challenged over some of the data that we collect. We're seeing, well, what are we seeing? We're seeing misrepresented data. So it's where the manager has incorrectly calculated the costs. It's where they forgot to apply a discount in their fee schedule, and maybe they've been routinely charging for some time. A lot of good, clean data, a lot of data that's not coming forward from certain managers and certain types of managers that should know better. What else are we seeing? Occasional complete mismatches in expectation versus reality. So the client had bought into a fund that thinks it does X and it's done Y at a very high cost. They're like, what's this about? But what we are seeing is, because we're doing benchmarking, is an ability to say to people, well, actually, you have cause to go back to the manager and start negotiating with them because they're well off market rates. Now, because we've only been doing this for a year and a half now, we can't say how much has been directly negotiated down, but evidence from the Dutch market says that in year one, headline costs were reduced by 15% of that headline cost in year one. Now, headline cost is about 40 basis points, let's say. So you can work out what 15% of that is. It's a few basis points. But a few basis points across £3 trillion is quite a lot of money, especially when you think about that cost being applied across 47 years, the duration of a pension fund. But rather interestingly, there was evidence that the costs didn't just have one-off reductions of 15% of headline costs. They halved over the next 3 years in Holland as a result of fee transparency.
That's massive.
So it's massive, right? And considering the cost base was on average, as I understand it, there are some journals that have written about it, was 1.5%. It means that they reduced their cost base by 75 basis points.
Right.
So if you imagine a cost reduction of 75 basis points across the entire UK pension market, you'd end up with a massive, massive amount of money.
But I mean, we've talked about this. Even from the man and woman on the street, reducing by half of your costs, and over the life of 47 years of your pension,
double the size of your pension pot.
Double the size of your pension pot.
Yeah.
That's
so 75 basis points, right now. Next year it's going to be 75 plus this year. Next year's 75. This year's 75, which will have been compounded and grown a little bit. So the savings would have been a performance improvement, compounded by whatever number you like. But just on the basis of 50 times 0.75, you're looking at sort of 40% uplift in the value without compounding, or doubling the size. Now, the economic impact of doubling the size of a defined contribution pension fund pot is very, very real. Imagine this: when you have a pot of money and you convert it to an annuity, generally the rule of thumb is if you could convert it to an annuity, but let's just say you could, you're probably going to get an income off the back of that pot of money, which gives you something which is about half of what you retired on. So you move from being an employee on X to being a retiree on 50% of X. Unless the pot of money is twice the size, in which case you retire on exactly the same income, maybe even more. Right? So you don't retire into poverty. It's not a problem if you've got something that's going to give you 100 grand a year and it's 50 grand a year. So what? You can still live on 50 grand a year, so you can't go on your cruises every 6 months. But if you only have a pension fund of £15,000 or a salary of £15,000 to £20,000, your pension's going to be 10. And the difference between 10 and 20 is at 10, you're still on state benefits.
Yeah.
So the impact on the state is immense, right?
No, that's. I mean, I think that outcome, going all the way back to the beginning and where you started this conversation about making a difference. If by looking at standards and establishing that and having the fight at the beginning to influence that smaller cohort of financial services participants that kind of double the pension pot of every 50% of the people in this country, or whatever it is, that's change.
I'll be blunt. It's a really scary, lonely effing journey I've been on. because, you know, from starting looking at this 12 years ago with people breathing down my neck and shouting at me that I'm, you know, I've had people at conferences pick fights with me saying, you know, who do you think you are coming here and telling us that we're wrong? Well, sorry, but the data speaks for itself. But you know, no one likes to be pushed around, me least of all. So I'm glad that they decided to pick a fight with me, because by picking a fight with me, they just made me more determined. As a rule, people get you know, given payoffs, or they find ways of getting people and softening them, but they never did that with me. For me, it was always a fight, and that's good, because that leans right into what I'm best at and what I'm good at. But I tell you what, it's a lonely place, and has been for a very long time. Coming in from the cold, when the FCA invited me to do that piece of work for them, was validation of you know, at that point, I think it was 9 years of you know, pretty much doing this by myself, right? And it's a scary place to be, because I've got a family. I got 3 kids, you know, and one manager that decides to sue me but pursue it rather than decide that it's not worth pursuing would inevitably bankrupt me, my family, and everything. So you know, I'm saying that now. I hope there's no asset manager thinking, "Oh, that's how to get him," right? But it's a pretty savage place to be. But you have, the only reason you do it is because you think that the risk is worth it for the outcome, and the reward is never for yourself when it's that risky. There's no good outcome for the individual in these battles. You have to do it because you believe that you're doing it for the wider community. You know, that you're doing it for the whole, because that's the only way, in my conscience, I could justify putting myself and my family at risk in the way I have. It has to have that outcome. So I know you want to get down to the point of how significant it is, but the most significant thing for me, the bit that keeps me going, is the fact that I kept going despite the risk is enough for me to know in my heart of hearts that there must have been a massive upside. Otherwise I wouldn't have taken that risk.
Well, look, I mean, I'm going to wrap up this little section now, because we've got the quiz coming along. I've got 3 final questions. But no, I mean, it's clearly remarkable story, Chris, and you are an inspiration to me. So I think it's fascinating that you join all that together. But now, if changing gear a little bit, I have 5 questions for you.
Okay, all right. I'll try to be less blunt than I have been so far.
You thought you were exposed in the sort of the tenement blocks of Edinburgh, dealing with marital issues.
Yeah, needles under the handle, needles under the banisters, you know, that kind of thing.
All of that. But wait, now there's a quiz.
and it's come about through my own mind. So that's all the fear that I need to raise.
That's just terrifying as a prospect. It just is.
Multiple choice, okay?
Okay, go for it.
5 questions. And I'm going to...
No, it popped out there.
No, what I'm going to ask, you know, guests go first, and I'm going to give, you know, Andy a little bit of a help that he can choose second. He can obviously choose the same multiple choices up to here. So, number 1, as of early November 2020, to the nearest 1,000, how many police officers are there in Scotland? The question: A, 15,000, B, 16,000, C, 17,000, D, 18,000. To the nearest 1,000.
D.
You think D? Andy?
What are all 1,000 of each? I'm just trying to now do sort of game theory, psychology, and guesswork all at the same time.
Theory.
B.
B. Okay. I'll give you the answers later. I'm going to come back. I'll run through the questions first.
Suspense is high, our listener.
Number 2. What is the Latin motto in the Students' Union at Newcastle University?
Oh my God.
Is it?
Oh my God. Is it Latin or Geordie?
No, it's Latin. Newcastle University doesn't officially have a motto, but there is an official one in the Students' Union that you know, having been there. Is it A, and I won't be able to pronounce it properly, or even in Geordie, but et orgibitur scientia, which means and knowledge will be increased. Is it B, mens agitat molem, mind moves matter? Is it fundamenta eus super montibus sanctis, her foundations are upon the holy hills? Or is it nomina rutrum, which is to call a spade a spade?
It's B.
It's B. And what do you think, Andy?
I'm also going to say B.
Okay.
All the others would be too long to remember if you were drunk, and but it just had the gravitas of something that would be scrawled on a wall in a university.
I hardly spent any time in the Newcastle because that's when I did my PhD, and I was mostly out in the Indian Ocean. So to me, it's just guesswork. But go for it.
Inside of your boat.
Okay.
Yeah.
Question 3. According to News This Week, State Street is exploring the sale of its asset management unit, State Street Global Advisors. SSGA is regularly recognised in the top 10, this is a clue for Andy, top 10 largest asset managers in the world. To the nearest 500 billion, as of 30th of June 2020, what was their AUM? Dr. Sier. Was it 3 trillion, 2.5 trillion, 3.5 trillion, 4 trillion?
A.
3 trillion, all right.
Just go A, B, C again.
3 trillion, 2.5 trillion, 3.5 trillion, 4 trillion.
C, 2.5 trillion.
C, excellent. Question 4. According to the Investment Association, one of the loves of your life, Dr. Sier,
I love them.
in October 2020, what was the best-selling fund sector in October 2020 this year? Was it A, mixed investment, B, global equity, C, global bonds, D, UK equity, or E, UK bonds? So mixed, global equity, global bonds, UK equity.
So mixed is multi-asset, right?
Yeah, broadly speaking. It's actually 40 to 85% shares.
Mixed.
You think mixed? A?
It's either that or global equities, but
I remember getting an email from mentioning bonds hadn't been tanked. I'm going to go mixed A.
You get A as well?
No, sorry, no. B.
The global equity.
I still had my thumb on the chess piece as I moved. Absolutely committed to so my pen was still in my hand. B is global.
We do have some standards, but not there. Question 5. According to Bloomberg and to the nearest $100, in case you're worried about currencies, what was the price of an ounce of gold as of 14th of December today, 15:10 this afternoon? Was it, this is gold price, 1,800, 2,000, 1,900, or 1 PS5 on eBay?
One PS5. I'm not going to say one PS5. No, I think it would be the largest of those three. 2,000.
2,000, yeah. You go for 2,000. Andy, what do you want to?
Oh yeah, but go A. 1,800.
Is D not calling to you?
What as a but you get some moody PS is on eBay.
Okay.
Yeah. Having fenced a few electronic goods to my mate Dave, I'm going to keep well out of fun.
Dave, yeah. The unit, it's like the Big Mac index, isn't it? The PS5 index.
Yeah. If I had to make a statement in a police cell, oh, 5 foot 10, white t-shirt, jeans. Now go find him.
You want A?
So Chris went B, I'm going A.
A, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I will now reveal the answers. Here we go. Question 1.
This is on the plasma screen.
To the nearest 1,000, how many police officers? There are 17,431. The answer was C. You were close, Chris, but unfortunately
not quite there.
Nearly. What is the Latin motto in the Students' Union at Newcastle University? You both got it right. Mens agitat molem, mind moves matter. By the way, the nomina rutrum to call a spade was made up by Lucy Kellaway in the FT a number of years ago. She's the best motto she could come up with. State Street's assets under management, one of the largest in the world, 3.05 trillion. So the answer was A. So well done, Chris. Unfortunately,
it was half a trillion off.
Yeah,
that's a nominal amount of money in trillions, isn't it?
I was thinking, how close do I want them to guess? Let's just go 500 billion. The Investment Association, the best-selling fund sector in October was in fact global equity. Global equity with 869 million, then bonds was behind it, then mixed investments.
Okay.
Just so you know. So that was
cool.
So actually, into the last question. You couldn't have made it up. 2-2. Tiebreaker, price of gold.
This is tense. This is which one of us leaves here with a broken pelvis?
So, according to Bloomberg, as of this afternoon, the price of gold was $1,836. And it was A. So Andy,
He's done it.
Andy inexplicably.
No, not at all.
Inexplicably won.
It's a comprehensive education against.
It was good.
Come on.
I can only, look, you'll have to apologise to our guest. However, to close, I have 3 quick questions, which I'm hoping we'll be able to ask every guest.
Yep.
And they're going to be, if I can find them with my notes, here we go. So your questions, Dr. Sier. Number 1, so in this industry, in the WAM industry, what, if you had your wonderful magic wand, what's the one thing you would remove or stop tomorrow? What would you take away or stop if you could?
Oof. God, there's so much to choose from. It's just terrible. Let me think. It wouldn't be something I'd take away. I would make.
The next question is to add, so you can think about the adding in a minute. But
okay, I'd take away.
go on.
I have to say, I think oh crikey, it's the kind of egregious compensation.
Right.
And let me explain what I mean by that. The calls by the CEO of a large asset manager to moderate the pay of the firms that they are buying or selling, whilst never once detecting or iterating the irony that he is paid tens of millions of pounds, is not lost on me. I would like to see a far better compensation model for the industry, far better compensation. I don't mind people being paid lots of money, but I want to be paid lots of money for doing the right things.
Right. And does that? I mean, my second question was actually, what that you'd add or install. I mean, is that
full transparency, back to front?
All transparency.
I would just make sure that actually that you had the ability to ask for whatever you wanted. Now that the technology exists, Chris, you and I know that. You as a technology consultant know that. The technology potentially exists, and it's good for the industry as well. That kind of ability to be able to understand what's happening where. If you're a good asset manager, you can only do well at, because your decision-making capability is what will differentiate you, not your shonky infrastructure or your private markets.
No, that's fascinating. And there's a lot of, I've seen articles recently about, I think it was The Economist talking about fund managers, akin to doctors. Why wouldn't, drug trials, etc. You think about the parallels of industries. What you'd want that to be open.
Yeah, absolutely.
Understand that what decisions are being made and why.
Yeah, it's and you want that culture of being open to be part of the industry. So if I could then go back to the last one, it's not just about the compensation; it's the culture of secrecy. I really annoys me that everybody wants to go, and they have this thing that it's my information and I can make money from this without ever thinking that you're not going to make any money from that. You're just doing it to try and not reveal things, and it's not right. That culture of secrecy is entirely wrong. It's anyway. That's 2 questions. What's the third one?
No, the last one's it could be quite easy. We'll find out. It's just simply, who should we have on next? Who's a future remarkable guest that you think?
Chris Willard.
Chris Willard. And for the benefit of those, what's because you worked with him first.
So Chris is the former head of competitions and markets at the FCA. He's the one that bravely took on the asset management industry. So if you get him to talk about it and open up about it, and I'm not going to talk his part, but I will say that the battle to get the FCA to be allowed to review the asset management sector was a long, hard fought one that he led. probably, and I don't even know if this is true or not, but probably was part of the reason why he didn't get the full-time CEO job at the FCA. But he is a hardened, dyed-in-the-wool, hard-nosed competitions and markets person. And he picks his battles. And he's very smart. And I've got huge admiration for him. And he's got some fantastic stories. He was obviously the interim CEO of the FCA until the new CEO was appointed. He didn't get the full-time job. He's now leading an inquiry into payday lending.
Yes.
Payday lending, is it payday lending, Klarna, etc.? You know, that sort of unsecured lending environment for and then after that, who knows where he's going to be? But I'm telling you, if there's one person you want to get on there to talk about how the industry needs to think about itself, the existential conversation the industry needs to have about its own existence, it would be him. I mean, I question it, but I don't question it from a professional point of view. I'm a bloody-minded, possibly a little bit talented amateur that's been kicking the industry in the arse for a number of years. He's a fully fledged professional at looking at this broken market and trying to sort it out. You want to get him on at all costs.
Well, brilliant answers. I love the way we wrapped up the first session. I can only apologise that my semi-learned
I can only apologise for being late, Chris. I deserved it. I deserved it for keeping you waiting like the prima donna I am. I mean, it's preposterous. The inflated opinion I hold myself in means that I was fashionably late to the point of being just marginally unfashionable. I'll apologise for the marginal part.
I think you jumped the line between tardy and fashionable very well.
Tardy, just bloody rude. No, I'm sincerely apologetic. I had to talk to my research group at Leeds, and it was something that came in the diary last week. And I honestly sent you the email. Honestly, I did. But if it didn't get it, that's entirely on me, and I should have checked in again sooner and written you something abusive on WhatsApp.
As I fully expected, it has been fascinating. I thank you wholeheartedly. And I repeat what I said earlier, you are remarkable and you are an inspiration, and thank you very much for joining us. It's been brilliant.
No, you're more than welcome. And, if you want, I can close with a quote from Archer. You've seen the kind of quotes I give you from that fantastic cartoon series Archer, or I can just leave it there. It's up to you. I mean,
end with the quote. Yeah. Thank you, Chris. I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to you might have seen me screw all things around, but the themes around trust, volatility, safety, and I really loved revisiting value for money as no longer is it a cliche, but it's actually a formula and an equation that needs to be explored. And I like your relationship between objectivity of price and subjectivity of where value sits. That's given me food for thought.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So very nice to meet you. Thank you.
Right. Okay. All right, guys. I won't do the quote because Chris is looking very nervous about it. You probably want to edit it out anyway, but that's fine. Thank you. And I'll see you again in due course. You take care of yourselves.
Have a great evening. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Chris.
You've been listening to Remarkable WAM, a podcast that's part of a mission to shake up and explore wealth and asset management. For show notes and details about this week's guest, more episodes and further information about our project, please visit remarkablethinking.com. That's remarkable-thinking.com. My name is Chris Mills, and thank you for listening.